Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kokkonen. I'm head of fraud and dispute at Nexi Group. We're a little bit different from maybe other panelists in a way that we're a processor, and we are processing 170 million cards in Europe. So my take on will be from card fraud specialty, and we do a lot of real-time prevention, so it will be a lot of AI in my answers. Good to meet you.
Well, again, I'm Ivar Lammers, heading for wholesale banking, ING, the financial crime prevention.
Tessa, I work at Rabobank as head KYC, also within the wholesale part of the bank. I'm responsible for, from a KYC perspective, for the global business lines like markets, TCF, project finance.
Good afternoon. My name is Ivar, and I work at Societe Generale as compliance officer, and we serve the Dutch large corporates here in the Netherlands. So yeah, wholesale banking as well.
So we're going to find a more efficient way of passing the mic rather than spend half the time perhaps it was. Anyway, right, thank you to my panelists for introducing themselves. So we're going to turn to the first question now, which is what steps need to be taken to enhance oversight and reporting systems to meet the required standards. So shall we start perhaps at this end with Jukka? Any particular thoughts in this area?
Maybe I'll pass it on for my colleagues first.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, I would say, also based on the presentation, for supervisory reporting, insights, we need to have our typology and cases and data against that complete. I think today we are too much still working on the moment of looking into a situation, which could be a KYC, could be an alert, could be sanction screening, but the ability to be able to retrieve that information and the case decisions and put that against how we are overseen by second lines, third lines of defenses, but also regulatory bodies is going to be crucial and paramount for the future, because those questions are going to be increasing big time.
Yesterday someone asked me, is there still a ban on generative AI within Rabobank? Yes, for unauthorized sources, like for example ChatGPT. No, obviously for Copilot, that is what we're using within Rabobank. I think what is important, if you look at the risks it can impose, is that, for example, chat messages can be stored, or your internal client data or other data is being used for the sources, like, for example, ChatGPT. So I think it's very important also from an employee perspective to have clear oversight on that.
Indeed, I would highlight the important part of data that you mentioned as well. The fact that the regulators always want us to report the data, which is quantitative and qualitative data. So keeping the records on how we address the issues or how we address the questions of the regulator, that's very, very important throughout the year, not only the day that the report is made. So that all starts with, I think what also Trevor mentioned, that we don't address only one point on the field, we address everything there. So every entry of the data is really important. And that's how we can visualize actually what our activities are on a daily basis.
One thing to learn from the card fraud payment and card payments in general, card payments have always been real time, so they happen immediately. You're on the POS, you show your card, and the payment should go through. We need to do fraud management and fraud prevention real time, because it needs to happen in milliseconds. So we've been using AI for forever. We have a combination of rules and AI in use, and that's what Trevor was also mentioning in his presentation. And that is what makes us apart from account to account. But that's happening in account to account soon, and with the SEPA instant payment, that's already 10 seconds, and hopefully soon enough it will be in real time also for account to account. For us, it's a prevention flow, so when the risk score is high enough, we will just prevent it. We decline the transaction immediately. But then we also have the monitoring flow. When we have agents, the human is checking also the transactions. So when it's at mid-high risk score, then we'll have agents looking into them. So those two flows need to be there.
Thank you. So we've looked, by the way, I'm told I must use the microphone or this strange technology here won't understand what I say. So we've talked a bit about how we use the data. What about the data itself? I mean, I've been in this game for a little while now, as you can tell, and I've never met a bank that will, or any other type of financial institution, that will tell me it has good quality data. So how are you addressing that in your organisations? What steps are you doing to enhance the efficiency of the monitoring by the quality of the data itself?
Yeah, at the moment that is a big problem because the data needs to be structured. Maybe in the future AI can have any kind of unstructured data in a matter of milliseconds to be used everywhere. So we make sure that we understand the data. Now we collect multiple data points. Recently we've been starting using 2 years data in fraud prevention because of the account takeovers. Also Fred was mentioning that the account takeovers are increased. That's what we see in the Nordics especially, because Nordics have been super good at having really good bank IDs in a secure way, but now through smishing and phishing and even AI usage, we can see that the accounts have been taken over. And that basically allows the fraudsters to do multi-channel fraud. You can do account transfers, you can use a card, you can do anything. So making sure that the data is good quality is of essence. You need to understand it and you need to collect it from different points and then have it in a big data pool to use.
I think what I would want to put forward on this is, again, something around the basics, which is data ownership. So if you would have a system of record, as you would have in a financial institution, so a customer system, who owns the customer data in the system? Is it the front office? Is it the back office and client services? Is it financial crime? Us? Well, the answer is a bit of all, I'm afraid, because the front office injects the customer into your systems when the customer is onboarded. Yes, you're participating with that exercise and journey by doing the KYC for the onboarding, but across the life cycle of that customer, the data is also going to change from other angles than just financial crime. The other way around, if I want to change an industry code to one of the customers because it started to present itself differently, I cannot just do it because also the credit risk system and the credit rating works on these types of data points. So by just me as one of the users of the data changing the data point, other processes in the bank are getting infected. So I think, in terms of data, again, I might get boring now, but in the basics, we need to figure out who owns it, how can we maintain data quality, how can we ensure that we know when a data point changes and that we all agree that it is aligned, or maybe at some point in our system architecture need to start to decide to have a multiplicity, so a redundancy of customer systems for the several purposes, but then we need to appreciate that we need to reconcile those. So these kinds of challenges are still underlaying discussions that are now happening on, how do we use data in new technologies like Gen AI, for instance. So challenging.
Yeah, fully relate to this. Ultimately, crap in, crap out. Within Rabobank, it's also, I would say, one of the key topics to have good quality data. And also to what you're saying, who can actually change certain fields in your systems. And just to take one example, Nike's codes. I think one of the challenges there is that they're quite high level. So if you want to link that to, for example, a financial institution, one of your clients, and you want to report on sustainability or other kind of topics, it's quite high level. So it's who is changing it? Is it indeed the global client owner, or is it the support staff who can do so? That's important to make a clear arrangement of it. And what we've now done is that from a system perspective, and we have stopped that people just can manually change, that you need to ask permission actually to do so. There's a separate team who only can change the data in the systems. And ultimately, that is what is needed.
Yes, thank you. I would truly agree with what was mentioned already. And I think an important point here to add is how the data is put in place. So is it a free text or is it a predefined text? Because at the end it becomes really, really hard to categorize the data and to make some kind of conclusions from data if it has been placed in a not pre-agreed way. So this is truly, it starts from the moment when anyone touches the client data, anyone who can have authority to change anything. So in each and every step, this is really, really crucial. Also for the systems, for the future, for the AI systems to be able to work with the data, it should be managed in a really predefined way. So it comes back to how to define these ways, how to create a procedure, a policy, how it actually can be placed in the system.
I'd like to add one example, if I may, to give it some more color. So on the example that you also gave, Nike's code, which is an industry code. When we ran the technology that I presented at the end also for the first time, we pulled in the market data on a customer, on an entity, and bounced that off against the internal data that we had on the customer. Now you see differences. One of the differences that we saw was the Nike's code. And we said, hey, we have a wrong Nike's code against the client. Yay, we've got a very effective system live. It was differently. The data lineage wasn't done very well, because it turned out that our system of record could only have one Nike's code per entity. There you go. A company could present themselves through multiple Nike's codes towards the market. And we actually would need to do a data lineage and system change to capture all, or stay, in some cases, what we've got today is a process where we determine, using workplace instructions very mechanically, what is the focal Nike's code that we need to register to this client. But it's not good enough. So we changed that, obviously. So I think the term data lineage from sources, your system of record, towards other capabilities that consume those data, the data lineage is going to be crucial.
You also need to control those data changes, because we have seen that there's authenticated changes, for example, a phone number. So when the fraudsters has already there's account takeover, so they already have the tools and the controls to make the changes to your data. That needs to be controlled somehow. So if you can see a data has been changed quite recently, that should be also a risk trigger for everything else.
Thank you. And before we leave this question, I'd like to ask one more point. We've talked a lot about the input of the data, how the data is processed. I wonder if we can spend a moment considering what we do once the alert has been produced. So, the management information, the streamlining of investigations, the workflow control. I spoke a little bit about the investigation hub and so on that we offer at Symphony AI. What procedures are your organisations putting in place in order to improve efficiency in these areas?
Like I said, we use a lot of automation in the workflows already, so we try to do as much of preventive actions as possible. The problem with us is that on the other hand, there's a risk appetite decision, so you don't want to cause too much friction for the cardholders in this case. The second factor is the legislation, so you can't do too many automated decisions if it's deemed as being, what's the word in English, but discriminatory. So you can't make automated discriminatory decisions. So that's one point that comes from the legislation.
Well, I think I can use two examples. So if you first look into the know your customer space, which is a massive amount of data that we need to deal with, but not just very important hard like party data, like an address and a name, but also what we tend to call soft party data, which is what is the source of your funds? What is the purpose and nature of your business, or the relationship between you and I as customer and financial institution? And way more types of like annual statements and those kinds of things. So to do that very automatically is challenging. Using Gen AI, we're getting there, I believe, in the industry in years, but today it's subject to model risk, because then we would start taking, the Gen AI would start taking decisions and there's no model for the second line to validate which decisions are taken when and whether we are accurate. So completely manual. In KYC, we have key controls in place, which is as simple as a second pair of eyes, which is called a signatory, who reviews the work of the actual CDD analyst. Then afterwards, sample size checked by the second line of defense, quality assurance. So first line we call quality control, second line we call quality assurance. Essentially redoing the work and verifying whether they would get to the exact same data points and the exact same decisions on the data points. And one other example, which is much more like flow data, so in transactions, client activity monitoring, lookbacks. There we use advanced analytics to do lookbacks on specific typologies 3 months back or 6 months back and see whether we need to remediate certain elements or angles to those transactions from a certain event that happened in the market, for instance, or whether we have performed sufficiently well in terms of quality. So different approach.
I won't tell the same story in that respect, maybe just on alert handling and effective alert handling. If you look at special investigations, all the laundromats that happened, the Azerbaijan, the Russian, the Danske Bank, etc., the red flags generated from those special investigations, how can you effectively bring that back in your business rules for your transaction monitoring? And you also mentioned model validation. Obviously, that is very important, but also takes time. So what we see, the feedback loop is really key. And I name now special investigations, but also the repetitive alerts we get on certain topics. How do you ensure these topics are fed back in your monitoring systems? And next to, obviously, when you talk about your transaction analysis, when you look back, how do you ensure that in those analyses you take that information you've gained in your processes? I think that's really key to do so.
Indeed, it's a very resources-heavy process to manage this in a proper way. And more banks are invited to follow a risk-based approach, and it is stressed quite a lot also in the Netherlands by the recent guidelines of the Dutch Banking Association, so NBD. And they really put an effort to encourage banks more and more to predefine procedures in order to truly follow this risk-based approach and put the resources on higher risk clients instead of really managing in the detail each and every client of the customer and of the information of the client. And for us, we are a large corporate, and we serve mainly wholesale clients. And there's a client facilitation team who is actually getting the data from the clients and putting in the system so the clients don't do it directly themselves. And here the efforts are placed to train the teams who are doing this actually. So to have a proper training in place, and the controls that Ivar mentioned that are really a key player on how to manage at the moment, at least.
So our next question concerns the collaboration between financial institutions, between themselves and also regulatory authorities, and the extent to which that is deemed essential. Now, we're in the right place to discuss this because, as many of you will know, the Netherlands really leads the world in this area of the project which started some years ago in terms of interfinancial institution cooperation on this area and sharing of data. And I'd just like the panelists to just give some colour into where we are in that particular process.
I think you're referring to transaction monitoring Netherlands. It's an initiative of 5 Dutch banks. Started in 2022, of which ING and Rabobank are part of. I think what we've done is send for business clients, GDPR challenged, but for business clients, encrypted data to Transaction Monitoring Netherlands, which is a separate entity. And what we've done is the connecting data, transactional data, see if there are patterns we can identify, but also increase the number of unusual transactions. It's all encrypted, and the information then is fed back to the individual banks. Because I think, as we all know, criminals, they don't stick to one place. Payment flows are getting more and more fragmented, and this initiative is aimed to really connecting data and therefore see a bigger part of the pie or puzzle in order to identify these patterns. And I think you go a little bit more in depth on where we are now.
Well, yeah. So, it is indeed exactly that, and maybe throw in a specific case to let it come to life a little bit. So, we're all familiar with money muling. I think it was mentioned also earlier. And the money mules know that if they stay underneath a certain threshold in what they deposit, that they don't get recognized, so to speak. So the money is spread across multiple banking accounts, across multiple banks, just to dodge the thresholds, right? Now, by doing what Kitty just said, is you combine that data in a safe way, so it's encrypted, it's not recognizable for anybody in between, but it allows the, let's say, machine to recognize if you add those volumes on top of each other, they actually by far exceeded the thresholds of cash deposits, which comes across as the proceeds of, for instance, drugs trafficking. So that's all good. However, where we are, I'm going to use the word slowed down, is GDPR, which is a good reason, because we need to navigate very carefully on the data privacy, more and more also given the presentations that we've also seen on Gen AI and what fraudsters could do with this. But it's got two sides of the coin. On the one hand, yes, we need to be careful. So there are a lot of challenges in the Netherlands, in the government bodies to definitively decide that we can open up, essentially the floodgates of this. Bad word to use in this typology, but you get the point, I guess. However, if we don't, we do not get to capture the money mules. But one thing I would like to put forward is, and sorry for using the stage for this, but is, yes, we are gatekeepers as financial institutions, as banks, but I think these kind of things are important to facilitate a learning curve for the entire industry and all the stakeholders, that we need to understand we can only see so far. And generative AI, or what we presented on Quantexa, the next gen financial crime solutions, they open up, they double click on things that we couldn't see, and it opens it up. Gen AI goes a little bit further. It tells you what you didn't know that you didn't know, which is also important. And also here, it's a very clear case. We can only see so much, and TMNL clearly substantiatedly evidenced that if we combine the data, we can see much more going on underneath the surface, undercurrents, that we can just as an independent financial institution.
Yeah, I fully agree. There was something similar done in Norway as well, and I personally feel that the authorities should come together and mandate this, because the market is really in a hard place. On the other hand, you have the data privacy laws, and then you have the AML laws. Which one is bigger? Should you be able to do something against the data privacy in order to do something better for the AML? I guess we are all bankers. How many of you like regulation, more regulation? Hands up. None, surprisingly, except the regulator. But I think in this case, it's all about the network. We need to understand how the payments flow and what are the nodes. So we will need to have a interbank network, and we need to see how the payments flow in order to pinpoint the suspicious nodes, and then we can look into those better. There was one fintech, they did a POC with Microsoft, and they used a blockchain-based data tool where none of participants, not even the owner of the blockchain, could actually see the data, but it can still do the network analysis. So we already have tools and technology to do that, but I think the market is scared to do anything. So that's why the authority should regulate.
Yes, of course.
Yes, one. Yeah, maybe one more example in this respect. It was an initiative by one of the universities in the Netherlands, together actually with another Dutch bank, ABN Bank in this case. Also Rabobank was a participant. It's on human trafficking. It's a couple of years ago, and they were very effective in designing an algorithm on detecting human trafficking. And they actually already identified a number of human traffickers. But from a GDPR perspective, it was not allowed to be used. I think there were EU guidelines actually that now are in place, so it can be used. Obviously, those algorithms are currently outdated and cannot be used again. But I think the GDPR and I think the developments on public-private partnerships, it's sometimes really difficult. How can you effectively share knowledge also between banks without anti-competition legislation, but also between universities and gatekeepers? I think it's a challenging and balancing act at the end of the day, and criminals obviously don't abide to that.
Thank you. Before we leave this topic, I'd just like us to consider a couple of other issues. We've spoken a lot about the legal barriers to this, and I think with the possible exception of North America and some areas of of Asia Pacific, that is the case sort of throughout the world. What I'd like to have the panel's thoughts on as well is the extent to which financial institutions themselves buy into this, because at the end of the day, okay, it's encrypted and it should be scrubbed and so on, but one hears on an almost daily basis that this sort of thing goes wrong, and also the security issues around this and what the panel feel.
It's a difficult question because you're in that tension, right, on the two sides of the topic. We are continuously overseen on being effective in capturing schemas ahead of the curve, not from the news. But the other side is, yes, it is incredibly important because there's this other threat that was also presented a couple of times today of identity theft, fraud, and all these kinds of things. And where I'm financial crime, a colleague in the global MT next to me, a peer of mine at MT, is global head of fraud. And if I look at the typologies that are happening there, I can clearly make a connect between, okay, so if I exchange through an email with my customer the copy's passport, how they are part of a trust construction that I need to know for them to do business with me, but which is therefore for a reason put forward by them. What would happen, knowing the technology that was presented, if that would leak out? And then the case of the Spanish bank comes to mind a couple of months ago with one email penalty. I think the only honest answer is that I don't have the answer, to be honest. Yeah, it's extremely difficult. So the only thing that I think we can do is navigate carefully. So per typology, if the money muling is a good example, and we find comfort in the industry, being supervisory, customers, and so regulators, customers, and financial institutions, for instance, to do certain steps, take certain steps, we should take them, learn, reapply to a next step. That is, I think, something that we're going to be going through. Fred, if he's still here, said something, it's an arms race. Oh, there you are. Well, that's the counter side of these things, right? Because I'm saying we need to navigate carefully, but the competitors, so being the fraudsters and the money launderers, they are not acting or navigating carefully. They're going as fast as they can. So I haven't really given an answer. I just shared my thoughts, I guess, on this one now.
Yes, thank you. I think banks are placed as a gatekeeper, and this is a very important role. And so the help should come from the government as well, from the authorities and from the regulator to support in this case. I think a good example for this information sharing is BDRP portal. Are you familiar with the BDRP? It's the banking data retrieval portal that is in the Netherlands that is used by the law enforcement authorities to retrieve the data from all the banks operating in the Netherlands. So it has been created already that there is a sharing platform for that. Okay, for a very limited amount of information that is shared, but it's there. So it is possible to also go ahead with this kind of implementations of sharing the data between the banks as well. It's just the security indeed that is at the moment, or the lack of legislation or lack of tools on how to navigate in future. But I truly think that that's the future, how we should actually move forward, because as mentioned before, we only see a little fragment of what our clients are doing in our bank at this moment, at this particular moment. So we also don't see at real time, all the time, everything that has been passed. Yes, that's true.
I'm hearing the speaker is really tending towards centralization, but isn't that really dangerous? I mean, we look at, for instance, what China is doing with their data management system and how they control their banks and financial institutions. We also opt to guard, because yes, we might have to do a little more work because we're separate, but that also protects our society, which are democratic in nature. So we also need to look at it a little more than just like, are we efficiently using our data or not? Aren't we? No?
Yeah. Recognize what you're saying. So if we would create this TMNL a few stages further down the avenue that we intended to go, and if we, let's just make it easy for the sake of an example, right? If the government gets overthrown and there's a different government coming in that wants to use that information for all kinds of purposes, it opens up to such a broad intelligence which was purposed for something specific and could be deployed for all kinds of other purposes. And then in China you also have indeed the socially monitoring of persons and social rating cards on taking your rights sometimes even away. That is very dangerous. The other side of the coin still is, and I'm not giving a solution or answer, I know, I'm just sharing my thoughts on this again. The middle step of the 3 steps of money laundering is layering. The concept of layering is, how do I pull something apart and place it in environments that do not know of each other, because then nobody can recognize me anymore and trace me back to the initial event, which could be trafficking of something. So there's a contradiction between those two things. On the one side, you want to centralize to be able to see the layering that is happening. On the other side, if you centralize, there are also other threats that come into play. You're completely right. And again, I apologize, I don't have a silver bullet for this right now.
Maybe to your question, to your initial question, Trevor. How can we? What can we do effectively also as gatekeepers in public-private partnerships? And maybe if we look at the transactions that gatekeepers, and not only banks, but also accountants, lawyers, report to the Financial Intelligence Unit. And obviously some of those are further prosecuted and looked into by the public prosecutor. And the feedback back actually to the gatekeepers is non-existent. I think that also, if you want to have effective alert handling and really knowing where you want to focus on, how should we have effective business rules? I think there should be somewhere also a feedback loop towards the intelligence units, public prosecutors, but also across the globe, because it's indeed not only here in the Netherlands, but it's getting more and more fragmented, also with PSD2 legislation. Nice bridge to the session 3 this afternoon, but it's getting more and more difficult. So the cooperation between institutions, I would say, is key, but then also challenging at the same time.
Yeah, to further substantiate that, so let's assume that on money muling, TMNL would become fully effective. What is going to happen? It gets deposited in another country, and there you go. And then you need further centralization, and then that risk also increases. So it's a continuous battle that we need to calibrate ourselves on.
and we're not a financial institution, so that's why I hesitate to comment, but I would urge everyone to play ball together, because fighting financial crime is not a competitive advantage to any bank. We can all help each other, and we can all fight together against the fraudsters. What we do have is, we don't have the transaction data we have is not our data, it's our banks, our customers' data. But we do have a consortium data, which is, again, giving us the benefit of seeing the bigger network. With card payments, you can't really pinpoint any flows, but what we can do is when we see new fraud patterns or MOs emerging somewhere in Europe, we can already preemptively help other markets before those new ways of working are going to the new markets. So we can already employ those stopping and other tools to prevent that before even if it gets happening.
Thank you. Just before we consider the last question, if I perhaps may abuse my position as chairman and make a point. You mentioned China and the risks of are becoming like the Chinese authorities. My wife and I have maintained very close relationships with people in China for a couple of decades now. She has her own skincare line, and she sources packaging from that area. And we lived in China for over a year in Guangzhou a few years ago. I think it's safe to say that the data that's being used by the Chinese, and I don't belittle your concerns, is more about association, about the sorts of political parties you're trying to support, about websites that you visit and so on, rather than financial services information. Also, people who I know who work in security, particularly with the military, tell me that the amount of data that is available is far, far more than they could ever use. And you can only afford, in terms of resources, to focus on those things that are the most obvious in terms of being subversive activity. So I think it is sometimes a bit the case that we perhaps, in our minds, overemphasize the danger of this sort of collaborative activity. I just put out that for consideration. I'm not saying it's definitely the case, but anyway. Morten's telling me we've only got another 3 or 4 minutes for the last one, so I'll be quiet now, except to just talk about the last question very quickly, which is the concern about mitigate the tension, shall we say, between examining the mitigating emerging threats and maintaining high customer service. And I'd like us, if we may, just to look particularly about real-time surveillance here and the tension between delivering a good service in terms of getting a transaction approved quickly against the increasing amount of technology put behind it in order to try to discover fraud.
This is actually one of the key things, because we don't know the data, we don't know the customers, the cardholders that are the bank's customers. So for us, it has always been really important that we connect end to end, and that I think helps in here, so that when we build something for the end customer, we need to make the whole link work. So we basically build APIs so that we can connect our data and our tools and our services all the way to the cardholder through the bank's services. So the cardholder is already we use two-way communication, so we are already asking from the cardholder, like, do you recognize this transaction or not? And we get the feedback immediately. And the feedback, again, is super important when we are remodeling or retraining our models, and whenever we need to get the feedback loop ongoing. So that's something that comes naturally to us, and it's just because we are a player in between the business.
So, 2 thoughts here. I think one of the key elements in financial crime more and more is going to be rule-based versus risk-based decision-making. So, if you look, for instance, at the KYC part, and we're going to move to transaction monitoring screening in a second, what we are doing is just a massive amount of work, day in, day out, with a lot of people. How do you get to do this? Within the bank, source, centralized, we all know those kinds of topics. How does it work? You've got law that translates into policy, that translates into guidance, that translates into work-based instructions in order to get a large group of people to work. That is mechanization of how we do the work. And the risk that comes from that is that we really rule-based, mechanically say the computer tells me this, which is not client-centric. We need to be also, without stepping away from being very rule-based, otherwise you don't know what you need to decide upon risk-based, to also get very good at risk-based decision-making. That's the largest part that I see of the key to more client centricity in how they experience the journey with us. I'll stop quickly, sorry.
Okay, well, we're out of time, but please join me in thanking our panelists for a very interesting and thought-provoking discussion. Thank you.